Good afternoon all. Look, I was told I had the last gig of the day. It's been a long day, if not for you, certainly for me. Many decisions have been made, and so I am going to keep my presentation fairly short. I'm going to start with a video. I'll give you a sense of then where Navy is affected by a transition into the digital age. But I'm going to present it in a way that I hope is vastly different from what you have seen to date. I was told you need to do a TED-type talk, so I bought a clipboard. I'm going to wander around like this, and I'm just going to give you my sense of where the world should be. If you don't like what I've said, I don't mind, because half of what we should be doing here is challenging our own thoughts and our own views of how the world will look. So we'll just start with a quick video. Thanks. Well, that's got nothing to do with what I'm going to talk about today. I've just had this ongoing passion to be able to come to an air power conference and show you something about Navy. So let's just talk about the digital age. What I've been asked to talk about, and I'll do it briefly, are imperatives, opportunities and challenges. So let me just set some context. Might be hard to believe, but it's only about 10 years ago that Navy stopped teaching Morse code and semaphore. Think about it. What I used to enjoy was at sea, you'd be alongside another ship doing not air-to-air replenishment, but alongside replenishment. 2 ships, probably about 100 feet apart. There'd be a couple of sailors in complete silence looking at each other across the 2 ships, and they'd just be waving their arms like this. And then all of a sudden, they'd start laughing as if the world had come to an end, telling jokes. And it was only at the punchline that you realised what they were doing. Where I'm going here is the ships were doing about 18 knots, 20 knots if they had a need for speed. But big data these days, the amount of information that we need to share across our fleet, the bandwidth we need to do it, it actually now travels, not at 20 knots, but it travels at, well, think about it, about 624 million knots. I mean, that is the speed of light. The information warfare side, though, is not the only bit that affects us when we consider where the digital future will lie. We have a tendency only to capture it around our management of information warfare. And I'm sure that that's where you've talked, or you have talked about today, but I want to go a little bit further. I want to go left of the fight, but talk about applications of significance when we talk about the digital world, but where it will enhance the fight. So I'm going to talk about a couple of things that are important for Navy right at the moment. The first one, let me say, is you might not have heard, but we're about to recapitalise the Navy. And I'll say that again. We're about to recapitalise our Navy. Government will spend about $150 billion over the next 30 years in doing just that. It's a significant amount of money, clearly. But there's an aspect of this that's really important where I think an understanding of the broad spectrum issues of what the digital age is all about is just as important. And when I normally speak to people, I don't always concentrate on the warfighting end. I like to talk about this continuum, and some of you might have heard me say it before. It starts at one end, the high end, with deterrence, which is what we do. Face it, as a defence force, our aim is to demonstrate that we have a capacity and a will to be able to demonstrate deterrence so that our adversary will think twice about trying to hit us. Next step down is lethality, because deterrence cannot be achieved unless you can demonstrate that you have a lethal force and that you're willing to use it. The next step down is availability, because quite frankly, I can own the best fleet of conventional submarines, but if they're all alongside the wharf and can't get away, I've not offered deterrence. And how do you determine availability? Well, you talk about sustainability. And below that is affordability, because at the end of the day, the service chiefs, including yours, myself, Chief of Army, we sit around in a group at the investment committee and we have to decide where our priorities are against what is a finite set of money. So along that spectrum, that continuum, and I use it all the time because there are elements of all of us, not just the fighting force, not just those who support the fighting force, but industry, but also other parts of the community who offer those who will be educated enough to be able to work the systems that we are using. It's those financiers who support what industry needs to be able to generate the things that we have to have in place for industry to meet sustainability, availability, etc. So let me just use one example. As I said, shipbuilding. You may have hidden under a rock after the last couple of years, but we're about to create a shipbuilding industry in Australia. But we won't just be establishing something that churns out ships as we did during the Second World War, where we produced almost close to 60 ships in a short period of time. And they were almost prefabricated and they just rolled out. What we are developing is not just 9 new frigates, 12 new submarines, 12 new offshore patrol vessels. We're designing an environment in which we can develop the future frigate beyond the future frigate. We're developing the environment in which, according to the threat, we can adapt how we build those ships. There's probably some controversy here, but I will say I don't expect the 9th frigate to look exactly like the first frigate that we build. And the significance here of what I'm saying in terms of the digital world is we are going to build an environment, a facility that is built entirely from, in Europe they call it Shipyard 4.0. It's a digital yard. It is the ability to understand your design intent, move that into design, move that into production, but also at a moment's notice to be able to redesign, reconfigure, and develop configuration control throughout your fleet. So we're actually taking the view that moving into the digital age starts fundamentally with the equipment that we're going to be using. It's all about being able to be adaptive against the need. The next point I'll say, it's all about asset management. And again, from a digital age, we seek to apply those relevant practices, those relevant arrangements. And I always use an example, and I'll use it again in this audience, given the aviation background. I always say there's an aircraft usually flying between Sydney and London. It used to go via Singapore or via Bangkok, QF1, let's call it that. And while it's airborne, one of the engines starts operating at a higher temperature. Now, before probably anyone in the crew has noticed, there's someone back, probably a mascot, who's already identified the fact the engine's going hot. They've already checked the other engines on that same platform to see if it's an issue across all of those engines. They've configured or considered the environment. They've looked at the technical means by which that engine was last maintained. They've looked at crew performance to see whether the crew has done anything to make that engine run hot. And all this is being done so that by the time it arrives in London, there's a solution to that problem. Why? Because that aircraft has to turn around and fly back straight away. Because it's all about bums on seats, it's all about profit, it's all about availability, it's all about asset management. Now, we don't do that in our surface ships. We build them somewhere, we sign a sustainment contract years later, we consider about 15 different agencies that all have a role to play in how we sustain it, and we wonder why we can't get our act together and deliver availability to the level we need at the time we need. Well, the opportunities that abound now in terms of the digital revolution and the fact that we will be building through our new shipyards a regime where we can understand emphatically how the ship operates will allow us to do true asset management. And that improves availability, which, together with lethality, offers a better deterrence to government. The third issue, we often look at artificial intelligence, AI. In Australia, if you ask most people what AI means, if you're from a rural area, you'll talk about improving cattle herds and things like that. Artificial insemination for those who didn't understand. But AI, in terms of, again, most people, if they get the point that it's artificial intelligence, will think automatically to applications such as robotics or UAVs, etc. There's another point to it where if you look at how you apply artificial intelligence to schematics or to scheduling, and we are doing that at the moment. We've done it recently with the helicopter aircrew training system, which is established in Canberra, which will train both Navy and Army pilots and aircrew. We've used AI to determine the scheduling methods and all the arrangements we need to do to make it faster and more effective and more efficient to produce pilots of the right quality, aircrew of the right quality. It's not just around the normal applications on the battlefield, it's all those other applications where we must need to move into the digital age. And the last one at the high end is things like cooperative engagement. The Navy signed signed an agreement last year that we will move to a specific way that combat management systems will be placed in our ships for the next 30 years. We have set ourselves on a path where we will engage through Aegis to be able to provide cooperative engagement. All of this is around using the digital age to transform how we do our business, but it's not just around the platform. It's about the environment. It's about creating a digital environment. It's about demonstrating that with these things you can be adaptive in your processes and you can match what is required across the threat horizon that we see emerging over the next couple of years. In some cases in Air Force, you would say, well, that's all about airworthiness. We'd say the same in Navy around our air platforms. But for us, it's also about seaworthiness. It's about assurance. It's about when CJOP says to me, the expectation that you deliver me the ship with the crew, I can actually demonstrate that it will do as he requires, and it will be done in accordance with the preparedness directive that CDF expects. So they're the kind of imperatives. It goes beyond just saying what is the business end at the warfighting. It's throughout that continuum that we need to consider all aspects of where digital design, where we move, where we transform our business practices. The next bit, I look at the opportunities. I've already spoken to them briefly. It is about joint design. It is about the future force. It's about the fact that we take, and the amphibious demonstration that you saw in that video, so I will refer to the video, it wasn't entirely just there for my own benefit, that demonstration of where, if we are going to connect, if we are going to bring Army and Navy and Air Force, there were air traffic controllers on board that LHD that you saw. It's a matter of being able to show how each of those can be done, and it's the transformation through the digital age, and it's the information we pass, which is the glue that allows us to do that. It is not just about the platform. It's about the package. It's about the ability to adapt and mould and bring a task group together because you've set the environment in which we can all work together. You should be confident that Chief of Air Force, Chief of Army and I meet on a regular basis, and not just in the IC, but when we are discussing with CDF the way in which we can produce what will be his future force, we do consider it together. We consider it as a joint design process. And I think of some applications straight away, be it theatre ASW, be it our ability to look at joint strike, which is not just a Navy or an Air Force issue, it is an ADF practice, or if we look at integrated air defence. So the challenges, I think, I've talked about the opportunities, I've also talked about why we should be doing this. The challenges, well, the very things that I've said offer us the imperatives are also the things that offer the challenge. And I know that CJOP spoke to some extent around cyber forces that will allow us to be able to manage ourselves. Well, for me, it is about asymmetric warfare, and I'll use the example. I talked about configuration control in a ship that we will design in one of our new yards, so I can provide assurance to CDF and CJOPs that it's ready to go when we need it. But the same thing that you hear that can and has happened in situations with air forces around the world, change one or two numbers in the NSN and you can completely change your assurance around the configuration control of your platform. You can completely undermine the assurance that you need for airworthiness, or in our case, seaworthiness. They're the things that still hit us. So at a ship level, configuration control, configuration management. At an operational level, it might well be that you just corrupt the data, the nav data. And heaven forbid, we might walk into someone else's territorial waters. Yeah, someone understands that. Tactically, you could start changing the control systems on board. And that is, you might not have any ability to affect the fact that your steering system, which is controlled through some digital medium, will actually be driven by someone else to take you into someone else's territorial waters. The cyber issue is important to us. The second point, disruptive technologies. We've talked about some of the things that might change. It is the impact of robotics, it is the impact of UAVs, and some of those things, and again, CJOPS mentioned them briefly, what it brings with it is a view about, we're now introducing asymmetric warfare, we're introducing, in some cases, non-combatants, and we also have to consider the legal and moral aspects of where the ROE might be applied. Again, it is a challenge. The third one for us, personnel capabilities. We're a nation of about 25 million people. Someone told me at some stage that there are nations in this region that recruit per annum more than every position or seat we have in an education institution teaching anything about IT or computer science in Australia in terms of numbers. I'm not saying they're recruiting all of ours. I'm saying in sheer numbers from within their own organisation, their own nation, they are able to do that on an annual basis. We have a capacity issue in Australia about our ability to keep up. And the last one, we live in a liberal democracy. The security challenge is here already. It's about our own R&D. It's about the fact that we have advantages in some areas I would say. Our research in sort of acoustic signatures, certainly in hypersonics and some other areas, that can be lost. It can be lost far too easily if the measures or the understanding of what we need is not embedded in the very institutions that are doing this work. So they're just a couple of challenges. I know there are plenty others, but they're the ones that keep me worried at night. So overall, what am I saying? I said I wouldn't talk for long. I've spoken for longer than I said I would. We are already in the digital age. Get used to it. It is all about immersion, full immersion in the full spectrum of what I've said, from deterrence all the way through to affordability. It's not just about the high-end information warfare side. It's about our tactical and operational use of information and of digital transformation throughout the entire spectrum of how we operate. It's about the creation of a digital environment and thinking how we work within it. It's about adaptive technology. It's about our ability to take advantage of the speed with which this is upon us, but also it's about the understanding that we need to secure the basis on which we say it. It's an uncertain future. And I'll end by just saying, one of my favourite writers, Martin van Crevel, once said that no success is possible or even conceivable which is not grounded in an ability to tolerate uncertainty. We must cope with it, and we have to live with it. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks very much.